And a picture of her shopping in a supermarket for ice cream.
No, it was beyond wonderful.
Right. Yes.
Do you recall any stuff that was rejected ultimately because it was too offensive?
No. No, honestly, I don't. And there were times
I don't, not a thing.
I was uncomfortable, and I said, "Really, isn't that kind of homophobic or racist?" And people said, "Get a life, come on." So I don't. I think there was stuff that was rejected because it wasn't funny. It wasn't funny at all. It wasn't interesting. So it wasn't. Rick is right. What made the place great, I think, is that it wasn't knocking itself out trying to be amusing. But if it wasn't funny or interesting in some way, there was a definite sense that it hadn't worked. And one of the things that was interesting about those people is that they were all so different. I mean, Sam, Rick, Stan will tell you, they were radically different just to meet them. You know, Sean, Michael, O'Donoghue, Doug, very, very different people. But they all had this kind of, you know, I remember once there was a studio upstairs where we did a radio show there, and somebody called me up once and said, "I know you like jazz. They're recording some interesting stuff. You should come up." And I went up, and over the next few weeks, I saw Lionel Hampton recording with a bunch of amazing sort of older jazz greats. And it was Dexter Gordon and Charles Mingus and Jerry Mulligan. And I watched those guys, and I thought no matter who they were, when the tape was rolling, they just started playing, and they were great, and they were very respectful of one another, no matter what happened. The Lampoon was like that, too. If you couldn't write funny or come up with funny ideas, it didn't matter if you were fun to hang out with. You couldn't really contribute. So there were people there who... Sean made a very funny joke about somebody whose name I won't mention because it was so cruel, and he said, "Pity, he's quite funny, but the typewriter is his natural enemy." And he was right. There's a person who was very funny, but when he sat down to write, it didn't come out.
Yeah, I printed that in the magazine under his name. Yeah, I mean in the book.
That's cruel. But he was right.
With a photo.
It really was about coming through. So stuff was cut because it was offensive, but not funny or not interesting. And there's stuff that was there. Nothing was cut because someone said, "Wait. That's not right," or "That's not nice," so that could be misinterpreted.
It was a very exciting place to visit. We'd go up to the office, and I'd mean to just drop off an article that I'd worked on, and say hello to a couple of people and leave, and I'd wind up leaving 5 hours later because I couldn't leave. It was too much energy up there, and it was too much fun. And the minds were amazing. The things people said, the ability with words, just piercing sometimes.
They also, I have to say, had a weird kind of charisma. Some of the, Doug and those people who aren't around anymore. But I remember just hanging around with Doug and thinking, he has to be the coolest human being who ever lived because he seemed to be utterly disinterested in being cool. But he was incredibly good looking. He was brilliant and completely laconic. There seemed to be nothing he took seriously. I mean, he was just...
Including hiking in Hawaii.
Including staying on your 2 feet when you're on a cliff. But it seemed in character in some ways, not because he was mad and bad and dangerous to know, but because he seemed truly disconnected from anything like normal concern or anxiety or self-awareness. And he was just very hip and cool. And Chase and Belushi and the guys who had to get very famous also had a real cool about them, but so did Sean and a lot of the others. They really had a kind of magic to them, and just to be around while they whispered funny things in your ear was pretty cool.
I was telling somebody about Belushi, about going out to dinner with Belushi, and he was having a big bowl of minestrone, and he was eating soup with his hands. I'd never seen that before. And he ate everything in the soup with his hands like this, like that. And I thought, I'm in the presence of greatness. This is something I'd never seen before. And there was a lot of that up there. There's just, I've never seen this before. I've never heard this before. So we were too young. If we were this age now, we'd say, "Oh, these kids, they don't know anything." Yeah.
Buy the book, it's great.
I was wondering how you felt in the over at the Lampoon offices when Saturday Night Live got started, because I know Michael O'Donoghue was one of the creators, and I think I read that he eventually felt that he himself sold out by doing that and by subjecting himself to the network censors. And I was wondering how you felt over there at the Lampoon offices.
Sold out was the goal. The goal was that at the Lampoon they paid you nothing, and television they paid you an awful lot of money, and a lot of people were very happy to go and leave. Mike Reese tells a great story in the book about working at the Lampoon for 10 months, and then he got a job that paid 10 times as much, and he left like that. And Mike had left the Lampoon before he went to Saturday Night Live. He left over an argument of something so minuscule that nobody can remember what it was. But he certainly was in a rage about it and continued to be until even he forgot why he left. But he took with him a couple of writers and all of the actors from, or many of the actors from the Lampoon radio show, John Belushi, Chevy Chase, Gilda Radner, Lorraine Newman, and a few others. And of course Bill Murray came.
In the show in the Village too. That a lot of them have been.
Right, in the Lemmings, which ran in the Village Gate for a year. And so it was not selling out as much as moving on. And I think he considered that it was time for him to move into other areas anyway. And so did anybody else that left. One of the great stories for me is that Jeff Greenfield, senior political analyst for CBS News, wrote for the Lampoon for 10 years while he was talking to Walter Cronkite on the air, at the Democratic convention, and Walter would say, well, what do you think, Jeff? And he'd say, well, Walter. And meanwhile, he's scribbling an article for the Lampoon and writing for them. And I thought this was really interesting that he could be doing both. And so the Lampoon gave people a chance to be what they couldn't be in their other lives. And this was good.
There were also, to answer your question, there were also people like Chris Guest and Bill Murray who were around and who were dazzling. I mean, I thought that I worshiped the ground they walked on because I heard them improvising in that studio, and my mouth fell open. I couldn't believe how smart and funny they could be just sitting in front of a mic and seeing what happened.
Chris Guest was amazing.
Extraordinary. I mean, his gift for parody, he had the genius that he later developed into those great movies. And Bill Murray was effortlessly thrilling and wonderful, and I still have some of the old albums from the time when the two of them would do stuff, and they would do late night FM, disc jockey stuff that was not only purposeless and demented, but entirely brilliant in every way. It was brilliant.
All of these Lampoon albums and the Lampoon Radio Hour can be downloaded on iTunes. I discovered the other day when I downloaded one of them. And because I've got them all on albums, but I don't actually have the thing that plays record albums anymore. What was that called? It had a needle?
Victrola.
A Victrola, right. So how are we doing on time? One more minute? One more. Una más. Somebody?
How did it end? I mean, why did it end?
How did it end?
I think it's a very good question. I don't know how Rick would answer it, but I'll get in first. I think it had a natural lifespan. And as Rick pointed out, there were certain precedents and certain that were just made for a satire magazine. And that changed. And I think the other thing is that there was a cohort of people. Brian Eno has a wonderful term, which is scenius, for sort of the genius of a scene. What happens when there's a club or a record label or a magazine that just attracts a certain kind of critical mass. And I think that there was a time when I left because it felt to me as though it had been a wonderful time, but the next few years might not be as much fun. And I'm not sure if that was literally true. It probably was still fine for a while. But there was a time when kind of the energy dissipated, and slowly people did leave.
Right. And what happened was that the Lampoon was unique when it began. For the first 5 years, you couldn't get the Lampoon anywhere but the Lampoon. For a few years after that, until Animal House, you could get it at Saturday Night Live and at the Lampoon. And some stand-up where people were doing the kind of thing the Lampoon was doing. Imus was reading the Lampoon every day on his program, not always crediting it to the Lampoon. And then after Animal House came movies like Porky's and Son of Porky's and Daughter of Porky's and all those movies they made. And you began to get what the Lampoon could offer all through the culture. And it was no longer unique. You no longer had to go to print, to a printed magazine and find this. And the people that the Lampoon attracted the artists and writers were discovering they could be far better paid if they went ahead and did something called The Simpsons, or South Park, or as George Schroed did, went to the New Yorker and wrote there for 20 years. I'm waving.
Time is up.
So the time is up.
The book
Hey.
is wonderful.
Indeed. So, what would you like to say something? Yes.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you to Rick Meyerowitz.
Right. And thank you, and thank Danny, and thank you for coming down here, Sam.
And they're going to stick around and answer any other questions you might have and sign books. So, and Abrams is offering anyone who purchases a book tonight a T-shirt. So we hope you'll.
Otherwise, they'll have to send them to India.
So come on up. Thank you, guys.